Hi everyone. In this tutorial, we are going to learn how we can create an analog clock like this. Here, there will be a lot of HTML, CSS and JavaScript involved, and you will be getting clear idea how to implement all the CSS and JavaScript settings combined to achieve this output. This will be the output at the end of this tutorial. So let's begin with the index.html. I'm going to have an index.html file where first of all I'll create the structure of HTML. So the doc type, head and body. Alright, so in this structure now I'm going to create a division. Step by step I'm showing you how we create a clock. So the first thing is I will have one class called clock which I'm going to apply later on in the CSS file. This division will display the circle of the clock. Now because if I type everything in the style.css, it will be little difficult for you to understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type the settings inside the browser itself. I'll open the developer tool here and select the division. I'm going to apply related values or CSS settings here only. So the first thing is I'm going to give some height and width for the division. So let me give few settings here. Now the next thing is that we need to shape this division from square to circle. So there is a CSS rule called border radius. If I give this 50%, as you can see, it converts the division into a circle. In fact, the division is still there. The shape is converted from rectangle to circle. Now these settings I'm going to copy and paste in style.css. The only reason is you easily understand that with each setting what actually happened on the page. Now let me just save this style CSS, and in index.html I'm going to include the style CSS file using the link tag. Let me also give the center tag in the body so that everything comes in the center. Now we'll refresh the screen and you get the output. Now let's add more elements to this design. The first element I want to add is the center point in the clock. So we assume that we are going to have a center point class, which we'll do it later on. I just create the class in the style CSS, but the settings of CSS we are going to apply by selecting that division, the inner division. Let me do that. Let me select the division. So now in this selected division, I want to apply the settings. So let's apply width and height first of all. I'll also give some background. As you see that the inner division displays on top of the circle. So we need to change the radius, that is 50%. So it will be a circle, and we need to move the circle in the center. So for that I'm going to have few settings on this particular division. Alright, so these are the settings I have applied here. The margin auto will make sure that it comes in the center, provided that we have top, bottom, right, left set to 0, and I'll say position absolute. So that's the fixed position we are defining for this element. Now I'm going to copy these CSS settings to the style.css. I'll save it and just refresh the page to see that it is applied properly. Now the next thing is we have to create a needle for an R. So for that I'm going to take few more divisions. The first division I'm going to take is for the R needle, and the related class we will create, but that class I'm going to define inside the developer tool to understand it clearly. Let me select the R division, and here we apply the settings. Now the moment I give some color, you see that on top there is a division which appears like a line now. Now we have to set the top. Now I'm going to say position relative as well. So now you see that it is moved. Now I'm using the cursor key to show you how the division is moved. We can decide the top here practically. I think this is better. Let's fix it to 75 at the moment. Now we are going to give the shape to the division so that it appears like a needle. So we have the top left radius and top right radius that we are going to change, and now we have the pointed division. So now for this needle, we have the CSS ready. Let me save this and we go back to the index.html. The next is for a minute needle. So I'm going to define minute class itself. Let me just copy this R needle and I'll name it to minute. Most of the things will remain same. The only thing is we can change the height and color also, so that we have two different needles. Let's change the height to 70 pixels and I'll just refresh the page. Now the only thing is we'll have to set the top as it is at a different height. So let's select the division and change the top. So now the minute needle is also set. So now these are the perfect setting for the minute needle. So let me just copy and paste it again in the style.css. Now the similar thing we are going to apply for the seconds needle. So I will have a seconds class and a separate division as well, of course. Again, I'm going to copy the previous class to reduce the efforts. Now we'll apply few settings here. So let's first of all save this and we go back to the developer tool after changing a color, and in the developer tool we'll apply the settings at runtime. Let me select the division and set the various height and top settings. This really is very easy when you put everything in the developer tool. CSS otherwise is a nightmare for programmers, but this way it becomes a kind of game where you apply all the settings and keep on checking. So now let's copy this final class and paste it to style CSS. So now we are almost done with the needles and the basic shape of the clock. Now let's also try to display date and the day inside this analog clock. So for that we are going to create more divisions. First is about displaying the date. Let me also create the class here in CSS. Now for this division, I'll go to Elements tab and select the division. And here I'm going to apply the related settings. Because now there are few settings applied, there is a possibility that we'll have to reset few settings for the needles for various divisions. Most of the time when the position is relative, it basically relates with the previous elements also sometimes. So in case if you add new elements to the page, it changes the existing settings, but accordingly we are going to change the values. So here we have these few settings for the info date. Not explaining in detail because they are easy to understand. It is all about width, height, background, top, and of course the position. Alright, so now these are the settings where we are going to display the date information inside the clock. So I'm going to copy these settings and paste it back to the style CSS. Let's also try a fixed value here in the division to see how the date will be displayed. So I'll just type any date, let's say 12/12/2020. I'll save and refresh. Alright, so this is how it is going to display. Of course here we'll have the dynamic value, and that's where JavaScript will help us. Let's also add another class where I'm going to display the day. So this is the info day class. I fix a value here, Sunday. Okay, so now the info day class is also ready. Now we'll have to reset the values here, going back to the developer tool, and now we are going to set the top. This looks better. So we'll just set the top inside the style CSS to 200. Okay, now let's refactor this CSS as well. Both info date and info day have common things. So what we will do, we are going to create a common class called info, which will have width, height, background color. All the settings are common, only the top is different. So I'm going to put it in a separate class called date, which I have done already. And for day, there will be a separate top as well. For rest of the things, we have the very same class. Of course, we'll have to apply both the classes to the respective elements. So to apply the multiple classes, it's very simple. I'll first of all change the name and give a space. So each class is separated by a space. That's how you apply multiple classes to an HTML element. Still the values are same, so it's working fine. Now before adding more elements using CSS, let's try to move the needles and let's try to make the clock working. And for that we are going to use JavaScript, of course, there is no other way. So we already have index.js file where I'm going to start coding. We'll begin with few declarations first. We'll have the hours, minutes and seconds variables. Alright, so let's create a function where I'm going to write the coding to move the needles, and the entire clock functionality we are going to write inside this function. First I'm going to get the current date and time. So we have the date constructor. I'll just keep a separate name. So we have dt. Now we are going to segregate the hour, minute and second part. So we have the dt dot get hours. Then for minutes we have dt dot get minutes. To know more about date related functions, you can check my Udemy tutorial, which explains a lot of features of JavaScript and also includes more than 200 interview questions, which is progressively updating. You can check the link in the description for the Udemy tutorial. Alright, so we have these three elements now: hours, minutes and seconds. Now let's also start implementing the rotation. So there will be a degree. So for hours, this is going to be the formula. This will give you the degree of the hour needle. So we are actually multiplying it by 30. So this formula is about the whole circle is of 360 degrees. So we are going to multiply by 30 degrees, and we are making sure by giving minutes into 360, that is the seconds, divided by 720, that is again the multiples of seconds, in which we are making sure that on every movement of minute needle, some degrees of hour needle is moved. Now let's formulate the minutes degrees. So the 6 degrees basically for each smaller segment of the entire clock. So on every 6 degree, the minute needle will move. Now let's also calculate the seconds degree. Seconds will be only the 6 degrees. So that will be the smallest movement for seconds. Alright, so now we have declared this degree related information with proper formula. The next thing is that we have to get the reference of every element so that we can access the DOM using the JavaScript. So I'm going to create few elements. First we are trying with second because we want to check whether it is working fine or not. So I have created a second element and I'm going to use the query selector to get the reference of the specific element. So let's say dot seconds, that's the class name we have. So we'll get the reference in the element, that is second element, and this we need to rotate. To rotate we are going to use the transform, and that's what we are going to apply inside the JavaScript. We'll say second.styles.transform. Here we are going to define the value. So this is the syntax of defining the transform. We give the degrees here. So the degree is dynamic, that will be stored inside the second degree variable, and I'm going to join the related syntax. Now let's use the set interval and just check whether the second needle is moving or not. So I'm going to call the function after every 1000 milliseconds. Let's save this and just refresh the page, and you see that there is some movement happening inside the clock, though it is still not the way we are expecting, but that will resolve. Now because the needle was moving everywhere, we have fixed the transform origin. Like if I cancel here, you see that it goes here and there, but now we are enabling this transform origin. So now the center is fixed. Of course there will be few changes after end of all the settings we apply, but that we will do later on. Now let's also do the similar kind of setting for the minutes and hour needles as well. Now let's also transform all the needles. Here I'm going to say the HR degrees, that is hour degree, and minutes degrees for the minute element. Alright, so now we are going to fix the transform origin. Alright, so now because the design is not up to the mark, we are going to fine tune this. First of all, this dot which is not fixed in the center, let's try to set that. The center point is moving actually. So we are going to select the related CSS and I'll say position relative. So because the parent is set as centered element, the same thing applies to this center point as well. Now let's set the seconds needle because that is moving fast, so we'll be able to judge what is the output immediately. So we'll go to the related CSS and here I'm going to apply the transform origin and that I'll set to 50%. Alright, so now we are achieving the desired output slowly. We are just checking whether the entire circle is moving perfect or not for the seconds needle. So if there is any change to be made, we can do that. Now we are applying the Z index for the needle, that is the seconds needle, so that it goes behind the center point. Z index is basically to set the position that is before or after the element, that is behind or in front of the element. So now the seconds needle is fixed and it is behaving the way we are expecting. Now let's apply the similar settings with rest of the needles. Let's apply the settings in the style.css. Let's also change the Z index for center point. Now let's apply the same thing for minutes needle. The position will make absolute. Here also we are going to apply the transform origin. Alright, so now this is more or less set. Let's apply the changes to the style CSS. Now let's do the same thing for our needle. First of all, we'll try it in the developer tool. So these are the settings for ours. Let's update the style CSS as well with the same settings. Now let's set the date and day dynamic because it is fixed value, which is an easy task in fact. For the day we are going to take an array. So let's create a function. So I'm going to create an array of weekdays here. Alright, we have the array of weekdays. Now let's update the day with the DOM manipulation. So we'll get the reference using query selector. Now we have the current date in the TT variable, which is an object of type date. One of the method is tt.getDay, which will actually be the index number from the array of weekday. Mind you that it begins with 0 only. The getDay returns values from 0, so you don't need to use +1. Alright, so now we have the day coming. Now let's also update the date value. We'll have another element, the date element. And here we are going to assign the current date. We'll give month +1 because the month also returns values from 0. So in JavaScript it returns 0 to 11. And let's get the full year. Let me add the parentheses. And we have the date section getting displayed as well. So this is a very simple clock you see. We can still improvise the design as well as few elements we need to add, like the digits, let's say 12, 3, 6. So the number of hours also we want to display. So let's try that. Now we are going to come back to the CSS section. We'll have another division, and inside the division we'll have a span. The span we are going to use for displaying the numbers, that is 12, 3, 6 and 9. First we'll begin with 12. So again the same pattern. The CSS we will try inside the browser itself. Alright, more or less it is on the right position, but still we need to fine tune. We'll bring it little down. Alright, so we are set with this 12, though there will be minor changes later on. We'll do some fine tuning as well. All the settings we are putting in span, and there will be only few settings which are related with the individual elements. So we are refactoring the code now. Span has the most commonly used items. So for all 12, 3, 6 and 9, these common settings will be used. Now we are going to have individual classes for 12, 3, 6 and 9. So let's first of all copy all and give the class 3, change the number also. Same is the case with 6 and 9. Alright. Now let's just refresh. And you see that on top all the digits are coming together. Now we are going to shift them with the respective top left settings. So 9 is also set. Now we are setting for 6. The settings are for 9. By mistake I've selected 6. So on refreshing you see that all the digits are set properly. Now there is some distance around the digits. The reason is we are going to put few spikes around the clock. So let's create a division for the spikes around the dial. We call that as dials, and this class we are going to define inside the style CSS. These settings are for dials. Now we have to fill the entire dial, the entire clock with those spikes, and for that we need to write the JavaScript coding so that we repeat it at least for 59 times more. Okay, so now we are going to get the reference of the dial, that is the dial division, that one line which you see above digit 12. Now we'll have a loop. We'll also take a clock element, and this will get the reference of the clock class, that is the entire division which we have, which draws the circle, because that's the place where, that's the circle in which we want to place the dial spikes. Now we are going to put a for loop. I'll say let I is equal to 1, I less than 60, so it's 59 basically. We already have 1. Now we are going to add the division for dials in the clock element. So you see that the dials have appeared now inside the browser window, but they are on the same position. So now we are going to use the transform to place them. Now here is the trick of CSS which we are going to use. The specific dial of i.style.transform, and we are going to apply the various degrees here. So on every 6 degree we are going to place the new dial. The next thing is we have to apply the transform origin to the dials class. Let's do that. And there you are, you see the miracle. Now the next trick of CSS is I'm going to use the CSS combinator, and here I'm going to say nth of type. Every 5th division of dial we want to apply a different format. So the height of the 5th division we are going to change. Now you see that for every 5 minutes there is a bigger spike or a dial line which you see on the clock. Now you see that it looks excellent with different 5 minutes segments. Now let's copy this CSS to the style CSS file and update the dials with transform origin. Now let's refresh and you see the output here. Now let's fine tune the digits also if we see any change in it. There, 6 is now properly aligned. I guess we need to work out on 12 as well, so let's do that. Let's move 12 a bit. This looks perfect. So the same settings we are going to apply in style CSS for both 12 and 6. Now let's refresh. And it is working the way we are expecting. There is still a minor movement of our needle we can set. Let's try to reset the hour needle. So now this is also set. Now let's apply some shadow to the clock. All the functionalities are done now, so your analog clock is ready. Let's improve the design also. Now you see that the effect of shadow is coming prominently.